So for this video, we're gonna celebrate a belated Canada Day and talk about the first appearance of Canada's premier superhero team, Alpha Flight! That's right, you hosers! So alright, let's go! Alright, so we start off with Wolverine in his home country of Canada. He received the message from Heather, an old friend from his past, and she wants to meet him in Canada. You know, she could have just phoned him or sent an email or something like that, right? But nope, that's not how things happen in superhero stories. No! But treachery! It's a trap! Heather didn't leave Wolverine the message. It came from Wolverine's old superhero team, Alpha Flight. And they're like, oh yeah, hey buddy, so like, Canadian government wants you like back here working with us, eh? And seeing as we work for them, like you gotta come back, buddy. But Wolverine says, no, I left for a reason, bub, and I ain't coming back. Probably because they have better paychecks than the United States, you know, if I'm assuming. Damn it. So, a pretty awesome fight ensues. Wolverine versus Alpha Flight. But eventually, Wolverine gives the team the slip. And just for some funsies, Wolverine goes through a trip down Canadian memory lane. That's right, that's basically when the Canadian government and their super secret Department H made Wolverine a test subject and gave him his adamantium skeleton. And how that process made Wolverine go ballistic and savage and blow up the whole laboratory real good like. And how in his primal state, he is helped back to sanity by Heather and her husband James. And they recruit him into Alpha Flight. Wonderful stuff. Wonderful Canadian stuff. Meanwhile, the rest of the X-Men are trying to find Professor X using the mutant detecting machine, Cerebro. But turns out he's in the Savage Land with Magneto. Something from a previous episode, you know, so nothing to do with this Canadian story here, so let's just move on. Back in Canada, Alpha Flight do indeed capture Wolverine, and they hog-tie him to a table in the new laboratory. Turns out, Heather is working with General Chason, head of Department H, and it further turns out that they want to know why Wolverine survived the adamantium infusion process when no other test subject did. Wait, what? Holy crap, that's dark! How many people did they kill trying to do this? And it's insane, really, because like even Wolverine flat out states to General Chason the only reason he survived the adamantium infusion is because he has a healing factor that allowed him to not die, you know, during the process, right? But no. Facts are ridiculous for a government. They need to know for sure by themselves. And so the testing begins. But this testing is horrible and painful, and it's almost too much for Wolverine. So Heather kind of remembers, oh yeah, I'm friends with Wolverine. I don't want to cause him immense pain. So she quits. The rest of Alpha Flight realize the horrible stuff that's going on in it, and that's not what they signed up for. So they fight against Chason and his robotic security team. They help save Wolverine so he's free to go, technically. Or hopefully stay with the team as Vindicator is trying to force. But Wolverine tells Alpha Flight to go F themselves, and he leaves for the safety of Upper New York State. And with that, like, that's the end of this beauty tale, eh? You know, pretty good episode, right? Well, I liked it. One thing I really liked about it a lot was that it's so Wolverine-centric, and like, Wolverine has always been my favorite superhero. Well, you know, Superman's a close second, man, but Wolverine all the way, right? Schnickety-schnick, baby. And man, in this one episode, you learn so much about Wolverine too. Like, if you wanted to learn about Wolverine, this is the one episode to really do it, right? It gives you a lot about his past all in one little kind of short episode, right? Like, you know, he was part of the Weapon X project, and that's where he got his adamantium claws and his adamantium-laced skeleton. That's also where he went berserk and primo. It's also where he was brought back to sanity and joined Alpha Flight. And it's also where he deserted Alpha Flight to go join the X-Men, right? Like, you get all of that stuff in this episode. The only main thing about Wolverine's past that is not included in this episode is all the stuff that happened to him before the Weapon X project, and all the time he spent in Japan, you know, crafting his fighting skills, right? But still, man, what an episode! What a Canadian-centric episode, eh? Alpha Alpha Flight, right? Alpha Flight, the one and only superhero team in all of Canada. Like in the United States alone, how many superhero teams are there? But in Canada, just one. That's all the government can find was enough for one team. But you know, as much as I do love Alpha Flight, it is a little hard to cheer for them in this episode, right? Like, sure, Alpha Flight was pretty pissed off at Wolverine for going AWOL, basically, and they wanted him back. But the way they went about it, right? Like, trying to get him back was, you know, kind of a bit much. You know, it's basically like, hey, Wolverine, how about if we trick you, we'll kidnap you, we'll beat the crap out of you, we'll experiment on you, and then after all that, you can lovingly join our team again. Hey, how does that sound, buddy? Yeah, no. I really can't blame Wolverine for not wanting to be a part of that, right? Especially with him being a lab rat basically in the Weapon X, you know, program to begin with, but to have it further happen, that totally splits too. Like, Wolverine was mad enough to want to kill Vindicator at the end of the episode. Like, I think that's a pretty clear sign that he doesn't want to be part of your team whatsoever. But c'est la vie, eh? As I say, man, beauty episode. You know, I'm really glad we finally seen Alpha Flight. But let us see what else we can find out about this episode. Yeah. So this episode was not exactly based on a couple of other comic books that already exist, but you know, some concepts of the episode were taken from comic books. So let's take a look at those really quick. Firstly, you have Alpha Flight's first appearance, which happened in Uncanny X-Men number 120 in 1979. So not, you know, word for word same story or anything, right? But the initial concept was kind of the same. Alpha Flight finds Wolverine after all these years and they try to get him back to Canada. Battle ensues, Wolverine gets away, right? Everything else from that comic book, not the same. Like, for example, X-Men and Alpha Flight fought for 2 comic book issues and it was pretty awesome, and they wound up fighting in Calgary. So not quite the same, but you know, the basis of it, right? The other part of the story, some of the flashbacks to Wolverine, how he got his adamantium skeleton, that was taken from a story that started in Marvel Comics Presents number 72 in 1991. And that was a story of how Logan became Weapon X and then I guess eventually turned into Wolverine. Like, you had Dr. Cornelius and the Professor. They were both in this episode, but I didn't really mention them because they were just, you know, blinking to miss them. So this episode is very Wolverine-centric, right? Some things about Wolverine and Canada we already knew from the comic books, right? Like when he first appeared in Incredible Hulk number 181 in 1974, we knew that he was a special agent for the Canadian government. In Giant X-Men number 1, we learned that he left the Canadian government to join the X-Men. But other than that, his history is a mystery. And well, that's where Alpha Flight comes in. So if we go back to the comics, Alpha Flight was created by legendary artist and writer John Byrne. He was born in Britain, but he moved to and grew up in Canada before going to the States and working on the Uncanny X-Men comics. While he was working on the X-Men, Marvel wasn't too sure if they wanted to keep Wolverine on the team because at that point the character was not developed, you know, they didn't really know what to do with him. He was just some kind of jerky guy with, you know, sharp claws. But John Byrne, you know, being Canadian and seeing Wolverine as a Canadian, he was like, yeah, you know what? We're gonna keep this guy on the team. I'll make him a better character. Don't you worry about it. And so the whole reason why Alpha Flight was created specifically was for Wolverine to have a bit more backstory. Like, what did he do before he joined the X-Men, right? Well, he was on Alpha Flight, right? Like, this pretty awesome team that, you know, kind of showcased some of Wolverine's past and people thought was pretty cool. Although Vindicator himself first appeared in Uncanny X-Men number 109 in 1978. And Vindicator, aka Guardian, aka Weapon Alpha, was a character that John Byrne had created quite some time ago in his youth and was finally able to put him in comics in Marvel here. And I guess some small portions of this comic issue, you know, were adapted into this featured episode. John Byrne intended Alpha Flight to be just a one-off. You'll see them in these, you know, couple of issues of X-Men and you'll never see them again, you know, right? But because John is so popular, you know, people really started to like Alpha Flight, and then BAM!
In 1983, Alpha Flight got their own comic book, and they were off to the races, well, for 12 years or so. It is kind of amazing that he created this whole team with all their backstory and everything just to be in 2 comic books, so it makes a lot more sense that they got their own comic after. They faded off in the early 90s, but they came back in the 2000s with a rebirth of Alpha Flight, which was pretty decent. Not quite the same, but with that original team, because I didn't really mention it in earlier on here, the team, in case you didn't know, consists of these members: the leader, Vindicator, you got Sasquatch, Shaman, Snowbird, Puck, Northstar, Aurora, and Heather. Honestly, pretty awesome team all around, right? So having all these wacky Canadian kind of superheroes did kind of open the door a little bit for some more kind of Canadian superhero content. Department H was always a thing. There were other characters that came out of there. Some didn't really last long, but thankfully out of that, we did get another legendary Canadian character by the name of Deadpool. So with Alpha Flight, this is their first and really only television movie whatever appearance outside of the comic books. Just this one cartoon. You'd think somebody in Canada would make a Alpha Flight movie by now, but no. Well, there is a fan-made movie kind of based on this X-Men episode, loosely. So it is kind of cool to see Alpha Flight, you know, in live action, even though it's really low budget with, you know, just a bunch of buddies. So yeah, but yeah, pretty much all I got. And so yeah, with this, that, those, and the other things, I guess, Sarah, that's that. Right on, and there you go. So thanks for watching the video. I hope you liked it as much as I did making it. Also, feel free to check out the source material that I featured in this video. And if you want to leave a comment on anything you may have liked or things I might have missed in this, you know, feel free to do so. Or anything else, you know, just to say hi. That's cool too. And other than that, you know, have a great day. Thanks.